All right. Um, Thank you all so much for tuning in to our live session today. We have our city manager, Greg Clifton, with us today. Greg, welcome. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, and thanks for having me.
Absolutely, my pleasure. And I really appreciate your time joining us on this video. Well, we're going to be discussing some very important information in regards to the city budget and finances and our moving forward as a community. Um, Before we jump into the meat of our conversation, City Manager Clifton, I don't want to say you're new to town because it's almost been a year, but you're somewhat new to town. How's your experience going so far?
It's going really well, and thanks for asking. And it's interesting that you phrased the question that way because the newness has long gone, right?
Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah, but it's the move has been great. Flagstaff is wonderful. It, it could not be better. But the one thing I would share with you is coming in on the tail end of the fire last summer, the museum fire.
Right.
And then now here we are in the middle of the pandemic, and we're dealing with major budgetary stuff and a recession. I can share with you, the newness is gone. we
Yeah.
are we are running. We're in full stride here, and I seldom even have thoughts about the fact that I haven't been here for that long. It just seems like there's so much right now in front of us that that's what's occupying all my time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're all very grateful for your efforts and being at the helm of the ship in this effort that we're in this crisis. I share that with you offline quite a bit. How grateful I am that you're our city manager doing this work, and that I trust your work and your team's work and all the city staff today more than ever, because you all are really doing a great job and really handling the situation to the best of our ability. And I really think we have some really good leadership in place. So I really appreciate that. So Manager Clifton, maybe talk just a little bit for the public who haven't met you yet, a little bit about your background, maybe some of your hobbies, just let them
Sure.
get a personal sense as to who you are.
Thank you so much. Uh, we came to Flagstaff, my wife and I, from Colorado, where I've been there the past 45 years, and my wife was born and raised there. So our background is from a neighboring state, not too far away. We lived in mountain communities for a good part of that time. And I mention that because the transition from Southwest Colorado to here has been very good in that respect. We love being in the mountain community. We like being in smaller jurisdictions or towns like Flagstaff, and it's been a very good fit for us. We have two kids. They're both grown. Our daughter and her spouse live in Bend, Oregon, and our son and his spouse, both kids, by the way, got married to their respective spouses last summer. So it was a very
Wow.
busy year. But they live in Colorado Springs. Everybody's doing well. My experience professionally has been at the municipal level for some time, for the past 25 years in various towns around Southwest Colorado, Montrose, Ridgeway, Telluride, and then on to Vail in the Central Mountains, and then here. In those places, I served as both a city manager and along the way as a city attorney. So I have a law background, and my practice has been in the municipal arena. But many years ago, I kind of made a shift over into management and never really looked back. I enjoy the management quite a bit because it's a little more of a hands-on experience, and we get to take a little more risks in what we do. But that's a nice way to bring about change, or be a part of change, I should say. And that's the last thing I would share with you. And going back to the very nice comments you offered up at the beginning, it is good to be here, and there is a very good teamwork in place. And I'm grateful for that, because here we are dealing with a major crisis, global crisis, and dealing with it locally, of course. But I'm surrounded by very talented people, and we have very good leadership at the helm in terms of the elected body. So the city is in very good hands, and I see that every day.
Mm. As much I was just thinking in my head, I'd love to start diving back into this past year, that since you've been involved in the different accomplishments that you've been a part of. But honestly, we'll have to leave that for another conversation. And we have a lot to talk about today that I really want
We
to
do.
cover with you. So thank you for what you just shared. And I think that, it's very good to have you in Flagstaff, and your background shows in your work and your leadership and in the day-to-day efforts that we are involved with. But let's jump into it. Let's start with the pension liability. This has been a big topic in the community for quite some time, especially the last few years. I feel like it's really risen above and risen up to a priority to address. And the council's had numerous discussions on this topic and trying to figure out what is going on with the pension, why is that number continuously going up, and what is the plan to address it. And at our most recent budget retreat, we came up with a plan, and it is a very solid plan. Would you like to talk a little bit about that?
I would, and thanks. It is indeed a very important topic. Sometimes it gets overshadowed with all the other stuff going on, right? But the pension liability is huge for the city and has been. I want to speak at a very high level about it because it's one of those topics where, as you know from the retreat, you can really get into the weeds on it. We spent half a day at the retreat with a lot of spreadsheets and graphs and all, a team of financial people speaking to the council, and you remember all the details of it. I will not go there. I'll speak in generalities. But it's a safety pension. So it goes to both our police department and firefighters. It's a statewide pension, and all the local jurisdictions contribute. So that's what it is in general terms. What's significant is that the pension liability to the city of Flagstaff, like a lot of other localities, has really grown through the years. Now, that could be attributed to some earlier mismanagement at the state level in terms of how the pension was administered. I won't get into all that. Suffice it to note that it is right now a liability on the town's part, not something that is discretionary with us. It's a liability that has to be paid. And the other thing I will share with you is that the unfunded part of the liability, what we have not contributed to pay into the liability, has grown. So think of it as a rather large debt that has even gotten bigger, like a big credit card balance, if you will. And we have not made enough progress to pay it down. So it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And that brings us to the present day. We have this liability on our books, and it's probably right now north of $115 million, which is a big sum. Now, the good thing is it will be paid off. If we were to stay the course right now, it would be paid off in 25, 30 years, give or take. We pay off the police part of it a little bit sooner, I believe, than the fire component of it. But in totality, the liability would get paid off over time. The bad news is the debt service on that liability is pretty significant, and is coming out of our general fund, which is a great encumbrance upon our general fund, and is thereby limiting our ability to see resources allocated to many other things, services and programs and so forth. It's that big of a chunk out of our general fund. So it has been in the town's interest to pay that off and try to lessen the burden on the general fund. And that's exactly what we're looking to do here.
And it seems, I'm just looking at our recession plan document, it seems that amount on a yearly basis at this point is about $12.3 million out of our general fund is going to the pension liability. And that is no small number for the city of Flagstaff, especially for our general fund, where those funds could be utilized in a whole number of different ways if we were free of that payment. So what are we going to do?
We're basically going to refinance it. We are going to pay it off with the issuance of another debt, and that other debt in turn will enable us to earn some income on the debt itself, on the investment, earn income and pay it off in a quicker amortization schedule, and save money along the way. And most importantly, to free up some of the encumbrance upon the general fund. So if you think about it, exchanging one debt service with another, it won't go away, but it will be lessened quite a bit. And to put numbers to that, and we haven't had the final numbers yet, but it's quite likely that we could save a couple of $1 million a year on the general fund, just in terms of lowering that debt service. Plus,
Wow.
it gets paid off sooner. The reason I say we're saving money is we're earning a little bit of money on the investment part of it, but more importantly, we're paying off the unfunded pension liability, which is, going back to my earlier comments, we're losing ground on that right now. So we'll be able to pay that off. And we do that by encumbering some of the existing city properties that we own free and clear, and specifically we'll be looking at our fire stations. We think there's a natural nexus between that and the safety pension liability that we're looking to pay down. In totality, we think right now with the low interest rates on the issuance of this debt, these certificates of participation, that over the 20-year amortization schedule, we could save this community about $55 million versus not doing anything at all and just continuing to pay down the pension liability. That's how much of a difference we're talking about, is $55 million. So it's a pretty worthwhile pursuit.
Yeah, I was gonna say, let's take a minute just to let that sit in and settle that $55 million in savings with this new plan. Is what we're talking about, while paying off this pension liability. That's incredible, and that to me is a win-win kind of approach. And if everything goes to plan, that's going to save the taxpayers a lot of money and also free up funds for other city operations. Can you talk a little bit about the agency that we're working with that has recommended this plan? You know, we had a great conversation from a gentleman out of Chicago talking about this, who's done this type of a plan with many different municipalities across the nation. And this seems to really be the way to go forward. Yeah,
it is. And by the way, it's not new to Flagstaff. I'll touch on that in a bit. But the finance team that we're working with is Stifel Nicholas, or Stifel Finance. They're nationwide. They may be even global, I'm not sure, but they do have offices in Chicago, Denver, Phoenix, of course, and all over the US. They have worked with municipalities on these types of issuances before. I have had experience with them. We did a couple of these packages in Telluride for a similar reason, to pay off an existing debt. In that instance, it was related to the acquisition of open space. And ironically, that payoff occurred during the Great Recession. And here we are in another economic downturn. But those parallels aside, the same process occurred. We placed this encumbrance on a few city properties. We were able to then borrow that money to pay off other debt, which was coming in at a much higher interest rate. And the bottom line is the differential between the two saved the community a lot of money. Wow. And that's exactly what we're looking to do here. We're also working with the state agency here, the Public Safety State Agency, the PSPRS, and they are helping us on this as well. And I keep making reference to enjoying some income off of all of this and saving some money. The way it works is right now the state agency administers the investment on all of this accrued payment that has occurred statewide toward the pension liability. You have the unfunded, but then you have what has been funded. On the funded portion, there is an interest to be realized, and that generally right now is about 7.3% on that. The problem, again, is the unfunded component of it has been growing. So that's where we're losing ground. Paying all that off in its entirety enables us to realize that same interest income, 7.3%, and then our only payment out is that of the debt service on the issuance. And we think with the low interest rates that exist right now, that, you know, if we were to land, for example, somewhere between 3 and 4%, it's the difference between that number and the 7.3% that's going to be earned income for the city over time. So we're actually making a little money or saving money along the way, rather than again seeing a growing unfunded liability. I know that's a lot of finance speak, and I don't at all profess to be a financial expert. But I hope it is coming across clearly what we're talking about. Yeah, and we have quite a few members of the community tuning into this video right now, and you know, I apologize if folks are getting lost in our talk about these finances, but
the takeaways are that we're addressing our pension liability fund, which is over $100 million, closer to
Yes.
115 million. And we have a plan that pays it off in 20 years, saves the city about $55 million, and we'll be done with this. You know, other towns in Arizona have addressed this through a sales tax
Yes.
or potential bonds, and we're just not going that route. We're doing it in-house to a degree, and I think that it's a really good plan, and council also feels that way. So I'm very excited to see that move forward. Let's move on to our recession plan, which is
Yes.
a nice document that really outlines different phases, 5 different phases of a plan, and how we address and navigate these waters as we move forward. Before we dive into it, maybe give just a brief overview as to how this plan came to be, and how we got how do we get here?
Well, thanks for that. And actually, one topic does segue into the other. We won't go any more into the pension plan, but one other takeaway on that is it will free up some dollars in the general fund, which is central to the discussion of the recession plan and the budget.
Mm-hmm.
So on to the recession plan, you know, we started putting this plan in place back in November of last year. And it was just I think, fortuitous timing wise that we had that in play when the pandemic hit us.
Yeah.
It wasn't quite final then. It's not something that we created organically. It's based upon recession plans I have used in the past. We used a plan very much like this in Telluride during the Great Recession, and it worked well for us. So it's a little bit battle tested. And the plan works this way. It takes the existing budget, and this is a nice alternative to having to redo the budget with all the changing circumstances right now. And our budget is rather significant. I mean, as you know, the budget process has spanned the past several months. So as you can imagine, going back to the drawing board and redoing the budget at this point in time is just not a realistic alternative for us. So the recession plan actually works as a good tool with the existing budget, and it enables us to look at a number of indicators, mostly revenue indicators like sales tax, so forth. And when we start seeing declines with those revenues, as we are seeing, then there's a series of action items. And it's an incremental thing, kind of a sliding scale approach based on 5 different stages, with the first stage being fairly minor and the 5th stage being fairly significant. Yeah, and as you're pulling up the plan, and it's about a 4 or 5 page document, but as you scroll down, right about here, you start seeing those 5 stages. And I know there's a lot of text in front of us right now, but the takeaway here is that each of these stages comes with some prescribed action items that will enable us, if you will, to kind of weather the storm as the revenues decline. So the first stage, just as an example, is predicated upon a loss of revenues of up to 2%. So that would be what is budgeted. If we see a 2% decline, then this is triggered. The next phase, the moderate one, would be 2 to 5%. The phase after that, 5 to 10%, and onward we go. So we are right now operating in the second phase, which is the moderate phase, which has brought about a series of action items that have already been implemented. And to illustrate by examples, we're under a hiring freeze, a recruitment freeze. We have deferred a couple of large purchases, and we are really scrutinizing our large expenditures to see what can be deferred until a later date. We have ceased all travel and training and a host of other internal expenditures. And we're doing that all in the effort to save money because the revenues are declining. So that's where we are right now. The next stage beyond that would be significant. That would be premised upon a 5 to 10% decrease. And I'll share with you, it's a discussion yet to happen with the council, but we're likely destined for this next stage. We likely will enter this part of the recession plan. And just to illustrate a little further, you know, the next stage beyond that, the major stage, which is very hefty, that's a 10 to 20% decline in revenues, and the measures start becoming much more stringent. We hit that stage in Telluride in 2009 during the Great Recession. So I'm just trying to give you some reference as to how this works. At that point, you know, there was a drawdown of reserves. We were cutting back on labor costs. There were some layoffs. Some of the more stringent measures were taken. Of course, the Great Recession had impact upon all of us. And this part of the recession plan was triggered back then.
And on the topic of reserves, there has been a decent amount of talk in the community about, you know, our reserves as a city and tapping into that 20% number that is floating around the community. And so I just wanted to point out that that's in the third phase right here is insignificant. Just talk about potential tapping into the reserves a little bit. Can you talk a little bit about that, City Manager?
Absolutely. It really is the essence of why we do have reserves or fund balances, however you want to characterize them, is for these types of occurrences. So they're not really emergency reserves per se, but they rather enable us to weather these downturns a little bit better. So we have targeted a 20% reserve in our general fund. I think it might be a little bit in excess of that. Some of those dollars are earmarked. They have to be reserved because they are securing a debt somewhere else, or they are contractually obligated in some way. But by and large, the reserves, we leave them alone for the most part, but there are times, and specific to this plan, as we get into the recession plan, there may be cause for us to have to utilize a portion of those reserves just to keep operating the way we do. So that's the reason we have them. And it goes without saying that if we do use them in part, we need to be very judicious in doing so. We as fiduciaries and as responsible governance to our tax dollars, to the community who pays our tax dollars, we cannot see those reserves drawn down too much. Doing so would be very risky for the city.
Right. Okay, let's keep going. So I think we talked about major. Should we go on to the last one?
The crisis? Well, we can, but let's hope we never have to talk about it. But of course, right. In a crisis stage, you know, that's where we're beyond a 20% decline in our revenues. That's where things start getting very, very serious. I mean, all of this is serious, of course, but in terms of the measures being taken, that is hopefully something we don't have to visit and have much discussion about, but it implies that we are greatly reducing our workforce and cutting services, eliminating programs, stopping our capital improvement projects, pretty much coming to a standstill.
Mm. And that is our plan. Now, all these different stages and then throughout this entire process, these will all be dialogues that come before council and with the guidance of council and the community. So there is going to be some level of, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? Just decision.
Transparency. Yeah.
Transparency for sure.
Yeah.
But you know, it's not so clear cut. Like it's not just because we hit this point, we do these things. It's a guiding document. And it really helps us guide us through this process. But there will be a lot of public input and transparency, as you mentioned, City Manager, throughout the process as we progress on this document, and hopefully not going too far further than the third stage. So that is the guiding document that we are working under right now as a city of Flagstaff, with the leadership of the City Manager and your team and city staff. Folks, if you have questions and you're tuning in, please feel free to chime in the comment section. We'll be happy to take any questions you have on any or all of this. City Manager, we heard yesterday from Governor Ducey that things are opening up as of today. Can you talk a little bit about what is opening up locally and what isn't opening up locally? What is our local plan, would you say?
Well, I cannot speak too much to the businesses in town, the businesses and restaurants and lodges and so forth. Some have remained closed, some have remained open. Time will tell who is opening back up pursuant to the governor's executive order yesterday. What I will share with you is in terms of city facilities, we also have a plan for reopening as we in theory, we emerge from this pandemic. I say in theory because the numbers are still, as you know, we're increasing our COVID-19 cases in Coconino County and the city of Flagstaff. We're on the incline. We're not on the decline. All that said, we are putting together our reopening plans. The very first thing will be our outdoor parks and open spaces and trails and restrooms and so forth. Those will be opened in advance of Memorial Day, probably on Friday, May 22nd, pursuant to our mayor's directive. That's more in anticipation of people coming into the community, which we're already beginning to see. The tourism is beginning to happen. So we're just trying to be responsive to that. Our physical facilities, the buildings, will largely remain closed, even though we're operating, as business as usual in terms of working. We're doing so remotely. I'm joining you here today from my living room, for example. Our offices are closed, but we continue to operate behind the scenes. I don't think there is a date certain for when our buildings open back up. That'll be at the mayor's decision. And going back to my comments about the COVID-19 cases here, which are on the increase, we will follow, as I understand it, CDC guidelines and not think about reopening until we have at least 14 days of declining numbers. But right now we're trending in the other direction.
Yeah, and that's a good point. We talked about we talked a lot about this last night at the council meeting, and how we want to really model and represent the way we believe we should be moving forward. And so we're not talking about setting up our council meetings face to face in a foreseeable future. We're talking about wearing a mask. We're talking about social distancing. We're talking about the numbers that are continuously growing, and waiting for a 14-day period where those numbers are stagnant and decreasing, which is just not occurring. So there's a lot of hype around the state and the nation to open things up. We talked earlier on our call with the county that the Grand Canyon is planned to open this Friday, and they're doing a staggered opening where they're limiting the amount of hours, but they're expecting a large number of folks to come to the Grand Canyon on Friday. And most of those folks travel through Flagstaff, dine in Flagstaff, sleep in Flagstaff, et cetera, and so we need to be very careful, because this virus spreads like wildfire and can take lives. And a lot of times folks are carriers while being asymptomatic. So it's very dangerous and it's extremely risky. And I personally have tons of concerns about what we're doing in the road ahead. But on a positive note, we do have our last testing blitz this Saturday, orchestrated by the county. And that is a free testing opportunity for members of the public. You can just show up and get tested and find out, hopefully, I believe within a few days, those test results. But that's the last testing blitz that we are planning to do in at least at this moment. And so having information is power. We need to know who has had the virus, who has the antibodies. We don't know the long-term effects of this virus. And so before I start rambling too much on this topic, I'll just stop right there. I think that folks watching from home should very much take this seriously, keep social isolating, wear a mask when you're in public. And although it might seem like things are back to normal, there very likely will be a second wave that's going to hit us and hit our economy, and hopefully not take us back to the beginning from where we started, but very well could be. City Manager, in wrapping this up, any closing comments you have for the public? Anything you'd like to share?
Well, I would echo the earlier comments that there are good leaders and good plans in place to help us navigate through these very challenging times. I could wrap things together by noting what you just said, the uncertainty as to what lies ahead. Will there be another spike with the COVID outbreak? How will that affect our economy, which in turn affects our budget, which in turn affects the services that we're providing to our citizenry? We're watching very carefully. We are on the front end of this thing still, so there's a lot of projection and unknowns, and we're looking at different scenarios and trying to project what goes forward. In a few months, we will have the benefit of some hindsight, and some numbers to look at to let us know, were we close? Are we close? As we continue to try to match the impact upon our economy with the services and the programs that we're providing at the city. But all that stated, the important thing is that we all stay safe,
Yep.
and that we do what we can to minimize that impact. There are so many factors that are out of our control right now, such as the tourists coming into our community, and what have you. So, you know, I think it's a good time just to practice a lot of good self discipline and good decision making, and exercise good judgment, because we're getting such mixed messages from everywhere, right? So if the state is opening up as it is, but yet in Coconino County and in the city of Flagstaff, we're seeing a rise in cases, that there's obviously a disparity there, and something we all need to be mindful of.
And City Manager, like you said, you know, having that awareness of the greater community, I think that this is a big challenge for people, because, you know, we tend to look at things through our own lens, and we think, okay, I'm fine. I don't mind if I get the virus. I'm young, I'm healthy, I'll be fine. I probably already had it months ago, but I'm going to go out and go about my day. I don't need to wear a mask. I don't need to worry about anything. But the truth is, you do, because if you take a step back and look at the larger community and your role in the community, you have a role in this community, and your decisions impacts others. And we have a lot of vulnerable members of our community, and especially given how tourism flows through Flagstaff, this virus is not gone. It is not going away. Like we talked about, the numbers are going up and will continue to go up, especially as we continue to test. But we need to take care of each other. So please be mindful of that, and wear a mask, not for yourself, but for the well-being of others. And City Manager, I want to thank you so much for your time today, and for your leadership, and for joining me on this call, and being willing and able to communicate with the public. I really appreciate that, and I'm sure our public does too.
Well, I really appreciate it. And I know, as we talked about the pension, you know, you can't have that discussion without really getting into the weeds to some level, and getting into a lot of topics that frankly are not really fun to talk about when you talk about debt.
What do you mean? It's so much
interest
fun.
rates and say, but I think it is also intertwined, and all very important. The thing I will close with, I'm very grateful to your last comment of the outreach that has occurred, and the support and assistance that has occurred to help the vulnerable populations here in our community and in the surrounding region. There has been a lot of effort and a lot of resources allocated to making sure that those who are without shelter not only have shelter, but have safe shelter. And
Yep.
that has been happening. And I think it's a real testament to this community, and to the leadership in the community, the elected officials, and many, many partners, to see those changes come about. And so we can't check that box just yet, but it's a step in the right direction as we're dealing with this pandemic.
And on that note, City Manager, I'm glad you brought that up. Last night at the City Council meeting, we talked about our CDBG funding, and that equated to a little bit over $1 million to be allocated in the community, of which a lot of is going to helping the most vulnerable in Flagstaff. So I'm very proud to be a part of the council that said, yes, let's move forward with that plan. Let's go ahead and help with the funding towards the shelter services for Housing Solutions Northern Arizona, Catholic Charities, et cetera, county efforts, and getting money into the hands of the programs that are getting people off the streets into hotel rooms or motel rooms, and then hopefully into housing. So I think at this point, the shelter is basically empty. Everyone is in a individual room at a motel or a hotel, one of 3 or 4 actually with the county. And that's an incredible step that we should all be proud of. Now it's about getting those people into housing. And so that's the next step that I'm really looking forward to addressing in the future. But City Manager, we can talk all day. Let's go ahead.
Lots to talk about.
and maybe we can do another one of these at some point in the future. But again, thank you for your time. Thank you for your leadership, and we'll be in touch. And thank you everybody who tuned into this call.
Thank you for having me. It's been an honor.